Black boy helps millionaire with flat tire. The next day, a black SUV showed up at his house. What next will leave you speechless. Matthew Evans, a wealthy man in his late 70s, sat alone in his silver Mercedes, tapping his thumb impatiently against the steering wheel. The air conditioner hummed, barely keeping the Kentucky heat at bay. Retired and wealthy from a life in finance, Matthew was used to things working in his favor. But that day, he found himself stranded with a flat tire, far from the comforts of his pristine mansion on the outskirts of town. After a few attempts to call for roadside assistance with no luck, he sighed and resigned himself to the fact that he'd have to wait. Just as he started to feel a tinge of frustration bubbling up, he saw a figure walking toward him down the road. A young boy, maybe 13 or 14, wearing a faded t-shirt and worn-out sneakers. The boy approached with a determined expression. Matthew watched as the boy's eyes narrowed, examining the car, before giving Matthew a polite but confident nod. "Got a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice steady. Yes, I do," Matthew replied, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. "I was hoping for a bit of help, but my phone's got no signal out here." The boy gave a little smile. "I can help with that," he said, kneeling beside the tire without hesitation. "My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer. Do you have a spare?" Matthew gestured to the trunk, watching as the boy opened it and pulled out the necessary tools. The young boy worked swiftly, his hands moving with a quiet confidence that seemed almost beyond his years. As Matthew stood there, he felt a strange humility creeping in, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He wanted to offer the boy something in return, but the young man hardly looked up, focusing intently on the task at hand. After a few minutes, the boy finished, wiping his hands on his jeans and stepping back. "All done," he said simply, offering a small, satisfied smile. Matthew reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills, holding them out to the boy. "Here, take this. I really appreciate your help." But the boy took a step back, raising his hand politely. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. Just happy to help." Stunned, Matthew stood there, money still in hand, as he watched the boy turn and walk away down the road. The interaction had left him moved somehow, though he couldn't quite put a finger on why. Alone now, he slipped the money back into his wallet and got back into his car, watching in the rearview mirror as the boy's figure grew smaller in the distance. For the rest of his drive, Matthew's thoughts kept drifting back to the boy. There was a quiet dignity about him, a self-assurance that wasn't born from money or privilege, but from something deeper. That night, as he sat alone in his lavish home, Matthew found himself unable to shake the image of the boy walking away with nothing but a smile. That evening, Matthew sat in the leather armchair of his study, surrounded by shelves of books he rarely opened. The room was quiet, save for the soft ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. His dinner, a perfectly prepared steak and asparagus, sat untouched on the side table. He couldn't stop thinking about the boy. Matthew had encountered thousands of people in his lifetime: business partners, employees, investors. Most interactions revolved around negotiations, favors, and deals. There was always an exchange, a price, or an expectation. But this boy, this stranger, had helped him for no reason other than kindness. He leaned back, sipping his scotch, the memory of the boy's confident smile replaying in his mind. He didn't look like someone who had much, Matthew thought, the worn shoes, the faded clothes, the dust on his hands. It all told a story. And yet, the boy carried himself with a kind of integrity that seemed so rare these days. The next morning, Matthew couldn't resist the urge to find the boy. He didn't know why, but something inside him felt unfinished. Maybe it was guilt, maybe gratitude, or maybe just curiosity. Whatever it was, he found himself driving down the same stretch of road, scanning the horizon for any sign of the boy. Hours passed as he stopped at gas stations and small diners, asking anyone who would listen if they'd seen a young boy fitting the description. Most shrugged or shook their heads, until finally an older woman behind the counter at a small cafe spoke up. "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." "Harlan," Matthew repeated, making a mental note. "Thank you." The town of Harlan was an hour away, nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians. The drive was scenic, but Matthew barely noticed. His mind was racing with questions. What kind of life did this boy have? What kind of family raised someone like that? When he arrived in Harlan, the streets were quiet, lined with modest homes and small businesses. He asked a few locals about Elijah and was eventually pointed to a small house on the edge of town. The house was worn but tidy, with a front porch that sagged slightly under its own weight. Matthew parked his car and hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he would even say. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. It opened a moment later, revealing a woman in her early 40s. She looked tired but kind, her eyes sharp and curious as she sized him up. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," Matthew said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened instantly. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said with a small smile. "He's always helping folks." "I just wanted to thank him properly," Matthew said. "He wouldn't accept anything from me yesterday." She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. "He's out back. You're welcome to wait." Matthew stepped inside, taking in the modest surroundings. The furniture was old but clean, the walls adorned with family photos and a few hand-drawn pictures that looked like they came from a much younger Elijah. It was a far cry from his own home, with its pristine surfaces and expensive artwork. Yet something about this space felt warmer, more alive. He followed her out to the backyard where Elijah was repairing the fence. The boy looked up, surprised to see Matthew. "Hey, mister," Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "What are you doing here?" Matthew smiled, feeling strangely nervous. "I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I really needed it, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it." Elijah shrugged, his expression easy and genuine. It wasn't a big deal. But to Matthew it was, and he was determined to show it. Elijah leaned against the fence, his curious gaze fixed on Matthew. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The boy's calm demeanor made Matthew feel slightly out of place, as though he were the one being judged. "I don't think you realize what a big deal it was," Matthew finally said, breaking the silence. "People don't usually help strangers without expecting something in return." Elijah tilted his head slightly, as if puzzled by the statement. "I don't see it like that," he replied. "If someone needs help and I can do it, why wouldn't I?" Matthew was struck by the simplicity of the boy's logic. He looked past Elijah to the yard. The fence was patched together with mismatched wood, the grass uneven and sparse. Behind the house, an old swing set leaned precariously, its chains rusted and broken. It was clear that Elijah's family didn't have much, but they made do with what they had. "You've got a good head on your shoulders," Matthew said, meaning it. "Your mother must be proud." Elijah grinned, glancing back toward the house. "She works hard. I just try to help out where I can." Matthew was quiet for a moment, absorbing the boy's words. He thought of his own childhood, spent in a house much like this one. His parents had worked tirelessly to make ends meet, teaching him the value of hard work and perseverance. Over the years, he had drifted away from those lessons, caught up in the pursuit of wealth and status. Now, standing in this yard, he felt an odd sense of nostalgia and regret. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Matthew said at last. Elijah straightened up, his expression cautious. "We're okay, mister. We don't need anything." "It's not about need," Matthew insisted. "It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor." Before Elijah could respond, his mother stepped out onto the porch, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "Elijah, you better come inside and wash up before lunch," she called. Then her eyes shifted to Matthew. "Would you care to join us? It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome." Matthew hesitated, unaccustomed to such an invitation. But the sincerity in her voice left him no room for excuses. "I'd like that," he said, following her into the house. Inside, the kitchen smelled of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables. The table was small, surrounded by mismatched chairs, but it was set with care. Matthew took a seat, feeling strangely out of place in his tailored suit amidst the humble surroundings. Elijah washed his hands at the sink and joined them, his easy smile never faltering. As they ate, Matthew found himself drawn into their conversation. Elijah talked about his school, his friends, and his dreams of becoming an engineer. His mother shared stories about the community, speaking with a quiet pride about the people who looked out for one another. Matthew listened intently, feeling a warmth he hadn't experienced in years. For all his wealth and success, his own home felt cold and empty compared to this modest house filled with laughter and genuine connection. After lunch, as they cleared the table, Matthew turned to Elijah's mother. "You've done a remarkable job raising him," he said. "He's got more heart than most people I know." She smiled, her eyes shining with gratitude. "Thank you. He's a good boy, but we've had our struggles. We've learned to appreciate the small things." Matthew nodded, his mind already turning over ideas. He didn't want to overstep, but he couldn't walk away without doing something for them. This family had given him a gift he hadn't even realized he needed. A reminder of what truly mattered. Matthew left their home that afternoon with a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. Driving back to his estate, he began to plan. This wasn't about charity. It was about honoring the boy's selflessness and the family's resilience. Elijah and his mother deserved more than patched fences and worn furniture. They deserved stability and recognition for the strength they showed every day. The next morning, Matthew made calls. Lots of them. He reached out to old colleagues, contractors, and suppliers. By midday, a plan was set in motion. Within a week, trucks and workers began arriving at Elijah's home. Matthew stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, directing the renovations as Elijah and his mother looked on in shock. "You didn't have to do this," Elijah's mother said, her voice trembling as she watched the crew unload supplies. "We've managed fine on our own." Matthew turned to her, his expression earnest. "You've done more than manage. You've thrived. But you gave me something I didn't know I was missing. Let me give back." Elijah was quieter than usual, standing next to his mother with a thoughtful look on his face. Matthew knelt slightly, meeting his eye. "You taught me something, Elijah. Helping people isn't about money. It's about showing up. I want to show up for you." Over the next several weeks, the house underwent a transformation. The sagging porch was replaced with sturdy wood, the roof repaired, and the rusty swing set out back was replaced with a new one. Inside, the walls were painted, the floors polished, and the kitchen upgraded with modern appliances. At first, Elijah tried to help with the renovations, carrying planks and sweeping debris. But Matthew insisted he take a break. "Your job," Matthew said with a smile, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while." Still, Elijah couldn't resist sneaking out to watch the crew work, his eyes lighting up with curiosity as he observed them measure, cut, and build. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, noticed his interest and invited him to help measure wood planks. Before long, Elijah was asking questions about tools and construction, his excitement infectious. Matthew watched from a distance, a warm pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something meaningful, something beyond himself. The boy's energy reminded him of the ambition he once had, before life became a blur of boardrooms and stock portfolios. One evening, as the sun dipped low, the project was nearing its end. The family stood on the porch, marveling at the transformation. Elijah's mother turned to Matthew, her voice choked with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore. It's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." Matthew shook his head, his tone soft. "You already have. You reminded me of what life is supposed to be about: family, connection, and purpose. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of the renovation project felt like a celebration. Neighbors stopped by to see the changes, offering smiles and small gifts: fresh-baked bread, jars of homemade jam, and even a potted plant. Elijah's laughter echoed through the yard as he raced around, showing his friends the new swing set and the freshly painted rooms inside. The house, once tired and worn, now radiated life. Matthew stood on the front porch, leaning against the sturdy new railing, watching the scene unfold. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in years: simple, unfiltered joy that came from seeing others thrive. Elijah's mother walked over, a cup of iced tea in her hand. She offered it to him with a smile. "You've done more than fix a house," she said softly. "You've given us hope. And I think you've found something for yourself, too." Matthew nodded, taking a sip. "I have," he admitted. "I spent so many years chasing things I thought mattered: money, status, influence. But none of it feels like this. None of it ever filled me the way this has." As the sun began to set, Elijah joined them on the porch, his energy still boundless. He looked at Matthew, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Matthew," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for us. I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people too." Matthew placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder, his voice steady. "You already are, Elijah. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together, watching the sky shift from gold to deep orange. The warmth of the day lingered, but there was a deeper warmth, one that came from connection, gratitude, and a shared sense of purpose. When it was time for Matthew to leave, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car. The boy's wide grin and his mother's tearful smile were etched into Matthew's memory as he drove away. This wasn't the end, he realized. This was just the beginning of a new chapter in all their lives. The weeks that followed brought more changes. Elijah's newfound curiosity about construction blossomed into a passion. Matthew arranged for him to spend time shadowing the workers who had helped renovate the house. Elijah soaked up every bit of knowledge, eager to learn. Matthew, in turn, found himself drawn back to Harlan again and again. Each visit felt less like a trip and more like a return home. He no longer felt like an outsider in their lives. He was part of something bigger now, and for the first time in years, he was content.